My name's Laurie Johnson. I'm an urban planner. I reside in San Francisco, and I specialize in disaster recovery and reconstruction planning and management, not only working in advance on the problem, but also working and studying communities and how they rebuild and recover after large-scale disasters. I was moderator of a session today at this panel, at the Disaster Roundtable, that was called Progress Toward Recovery. And it was a multi-governmental, multi-level viewpoint with various perspectives on what is being done right now to advance recovery efforts with a US-centric focus. It was led off by two federal agencies, the key federal agencies responsible for recovery programs. First, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Deborah Ingram, who is also the Assistant Administrator for the Recovery Directorate and has been out evangelizing now a recently published document called the National Disaster Recovery Framework. It came out in September 2011, and this is really the federal government's response to reforms that were enacted by Congress after Hurricane Katrina in 2005, mandating that the federal agencies think through the recovery problem, think through how different federal agencies are going to coordinate, what their roles are going to be, what the needs are. And so this is definitely a major step forward that we've recognized, that Katrina certainly illustrated in ways that we hadn't seen before in such a large-scale disaster with so many states and communities involved at the same time in trying to deal with rebuilding lives, homes, businesses. And so it's really new and very exciting. And she talked about some of the challenges ahead as they try to develop guidelines for how the recovery framework should be rolled out and implemented post-disaster, what sort of planning communities and state governments should be doing in advance. But some key aspects of the framework are that it really calls out the primacy, the important role, the leadership role that local governments and state governments have in recovery, and that federal agencies are really there to support the recovery process. Another key role is really recognizing the need for recovery coordinators at all levels of government and with the private nonprofit sectors and community leaders to be able to integrate all of these different recovery actors, sort of the ecosystem of rebuilders, I call them, into the recovery process. So a lot of that thinking, that sort of integrated view is really coming out in the framework, but it is really just the beginning of a long process of rolling and sort of professionalizing that and implementing that framework. The second federal presenter was from the U.S. Housing and Urban Development Organization, talking about the role that they play typically in very large-scale disasters when our standard federal programs aren't enough. We often, Congress will then pass an act that allows us under the Community Development Block Grant in the U.S. to provide additional assistance to state and localities, very much focused on housing recovery, business recovery, community level recovery, and the gaps that typically exist that we see in long-term recovery, the big challenges that we see in big catastrophes. So really talking about how critical that program has been in the United States in recent years, dealing with 9/11 recovery, building of, I think she said, 35,000 housing units in New York City. Most people don't realize that 9/11 was a housing disaster as well as a economic impact to Lower Manhattan. But also Hurricane Katrina, a huge amount of block grant assistance that's gone out for that, as well as many other floods and hurricanes. Then we had a series of local government panelists, a couple from San Francisco talking about what San Francisco is doing in advance, but also what they've been doing since the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, learning lessons over this past 20 years and trying to ensure not only that our physical environment is stronger and more resistant to future earthquakes, but also looking at governance, looking at how to empower our communities and build networks in advance so people can communicate and understand how to work together and collaborate on recovery, and also understanding the region's economy is going to be really challenged in a large-scale disaster. And then we also heard from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and a county official there who talked about the challenges of politics and disasters in particular, and providing leadership at the local level to really move forward recovery and what they had to work through in Iowa over the last few years since they had some devastating floods.